Welcome back to Profiteers versus the People, the podcast where we sit around and talk shit about people that we've never met that happen to have a lot of money. Actually, it's because they're dumb, and they make a living mythologizing their journeys of blindly feeling around in the dark, freaked out the whole time, and then say, I knew there was a light switch here, when they finally find it. I'm Money Mike.
I'm Rad Bill.
And...
So when the iPhone came out, I don't know if you remember this, but it seemed to me, a stupid teenager at the time, that all of the press on that little black mirror was absolutely glowing. Basically just ad copy. I figured at the time, correctly in part, that it was because Apple was releasing a revolutionary new product. And make no mistake, they were. The other reason this was happening was because Steve Jobs had instituted an unspoken one strike you're out policy for dealing with journalists. Product releases happened in pitch black rooms and were invite only. If you had anything negative to say about Mr. Jobs or his fabulous doodads, you were given a career-ending cold shoulder and would be banned from attending the releases or getting your hands on the product prior to the release. Conversely, journalists who swooned over Steve would be invited to form intimate personal relationships with the man, opening the door for book deals.
And thus, Steve Jobs became Jesus Christ.
So it goes. Steve's approach here was unique by degree only. Tech people love doodads, investors love doodads, and Silicon Valley was the doodad capital of the fucking universe at this time. As such, almost all the journalists combing the valley were doing so to write about new doodads and doodad dudes. By the time Peter had entered the arena, the rules of engagement, though never spoken, were widely understood. If you weren't in the good graces of the doodad dudes, a small pool of whom were releasing the shiniest, newest doodads, the only time you're going to hear about new doodads is in the news. And whatever news thing you're publishing is going to fold. Period. End of story. You aren't going to sell any ads if you don't pay your dues to the doodad dudes, dude. Thus, in a golden age of tech hardware releases, the press, otherwise, in this case, responsible for helping the rest of us discern good products from bad, were completely neutered. Founders across the bay enjoyed this dynamic. Steve Jobs, a barefooted, stinky man who parked in handicapped spaces and ruled with an iron fist, was portrayed as a beloved and delicate piece of modern furniture, wrapped in black cashmere and light blue denim.
And if you're wondering why we all liked Elon Musk for so long, look no further than this phenomenon.
Yeah, that's it. It's because tech was sort of afraid of pissing him off, because if they did, they wouldn't be let into big reveals, etc., etc. Tech founders in Silicon Valley in the early 2000s basically enjoyed complete control of the press. Seizing on the nervous reverence of the press, Peter was able to be three different, very handsomely paid things at once: an obsessive contrarian and very successful hedge fund manager, a venture capitalist devoting his life to handing the reins to young people, and the tech genius who was America's only hope against terrorism, which that's a thing for our next episode.
Chapter 1. Everything Peter Thiel touches turns to gold.
This was the title of an article in the New York Post. We touched on the inclination to assign meaning to actions retrospectively in the last episode, but what I feel like is worth focusing on here is the fact that after PayPal's sale and in the midst of Thiel's Clarium success, Peter's role in crafting his own persona almost became tertiary. I mean, so much of the work was done by everybody else. To ensure positions on the Valley guest lists, journalists were schmoozing like politicians. So, in the same way that someone like Elon Musk or John McAfee would be labeled eccentric instead of stupid and crazy, both common media diagnoses in the early 2000s, mind you, Peter Thiel was declared quirky, with some journalists having the gall to call him optimistic, which floored me. I don't think journalists focused on gaining access and gathering invites around this time had any idea of the grave consequences of this pandering. I would say that a ton of this has brought us to where we are now. They spoiled these kids rotten, and now look at us. I'm reminded by a Stoic quote read while doom scrolling the other day, and I will figure out who said it and put that in the sources, but the quote is, "There are no ends, only means."
Thiel was literally betting on the downfall of the United States. That just isn't something that an optimist does. But like Rad Bill said, I feel like journalists have to use like code words. Instead of quirky, what they really mean.
Yeah.
Instead of optimistic, what they really mean.
Quirky means Kara Swisher fucking hated this guy.
Yeah. But what's so funny about this phenomenon is it has had so many macro bad effects. Obviously.
Totally.
But on a really small microcosm, this is part of the reason that when you're looking for like a recommendation on what piece of tech to buy, you have to say, which best piece of tech to buy? Year, Reddit. With the hope that you're going to get somebody somewhat objective who's actually held the thing in their hands and not some pandering journalist who's like, well, it broke after 6 months, which really gave me an opportunity to go upgrade.
Make no mistake, they're working out the kinks.
Yeah, and now Reddit is becoming infiltrated by grassroots commenters saying, oh yeah, I love this thing. And you're like, oh, that's weird. It almost looks like this profile only recommends things from this one company.
Yeah.
Interesting. The internet is dead and I'm walking among zombies.
There you go. We continue our marathon sprint to the next source of honest reviewership of products that we might want to buy in the future.
Yeah.
Now, although the media was helping Thiel a great deal, he wasn't leaving his aesthetic to chance and was still deeply invested in how he was perceived, same as everyone in the Valley. California in general is an extremely self-conscious place when you get into the upper echelon of society, high society, I suppose. Very fragile. With his PayPal winnings, Thiel bought a Ferrari, a condo, and then a mansion soon after, and a restaurant called Faison in San Francisco. He hired Daniel Patterson, the hottest chef in the city, to build a menu and hired an architect to redesign the place, incentivizing said architect with an apartment and a brand new Ducati motorcycle, which
sick,
pretty sweet. Yep, that's pretty damn cool. The restaurant was also appointed with top-of-the-line furniture. It was the fanciest place in the whole damn town. Also, the bathrooms were co-ed, allowing patrons a quickie between courses or after some time on the dance floor. Oh. And the place was outfitted with a $1 million sound system.
I wonder how Peter Thiel is feeling about men and women's restrooms and vice versa here in the past couple of years. Anyway, this sounds like two different things, right? Like a fine dining establishment and a nightclub and maybe an orgy room. I don't know. Which is probably what caused it to fail. But it attracted celebs and it was an ideal meeting location for Thiel, who reveled in this newfound cool aesthetic, which really makes me think that Thiel is A, getting to the point of wealthy where he could just undertake certain ventures with absolutely no expectation that they would make him any money. And B, you know, the whole awkward college kid who had fans, not friends, and really didn't seem interested in how he was perceived by his peers. That is out the fucking window.
That's gone. That is gone. Yes, you're exactly right.
His only redeeming quality were like, he's an asshole, but like I kind of respect that. It is gone. He is now a full-on LA socialite. Just so wrapped up in blankets upon blankets of narcissism that he's throwing money at a nightclub orgy bar.
Yeah, a sticky floored nightclub amidst a 5-star dining establishment. Yeah, stupid, but again, the focus is ornamental cool or whatever. Yeah. In parallel with Clarion, he began to once again get serious about tech investing. And
Red Bill, sorry to stop you. Can you remind us what Clarion is again?
That's a great idea. Thank you, Money Mike. Yes, Clarion is his hedge fund.
Yeah.
He left PayPal abruptly. He kicks off Clarion and early on sees success. At the end of the last episode, we touched on how it ultimately tanked, and we're going to hit that in more detail here. But that's what Clarion is. It's his very, contrarian hedge fund.
Yeah.
And thank you, Money Mike. In parallel with Clarion, he began to once again get serious about tech investing and would often meet with aspiring young entrepreneurs and prospective new hires at his nightclub/restaurant. The corner booth in a nightclub can make a plasticky facial expression look dignified as hell. No ifs, ands, or buts. At the end of these meet and greets with the youths, he would write great big checks and slide them across the table, just as sort of a, take this check, think about the job, no risks, no strings attached, the money's yours.
Can you imagine trying to have an interview at a fucking nightclub? Like,
Yeah.
Peter Thiel's over like, tell me about a time when you solved a problem that required you to think creatively. And you're on the other side of the table like, huh?
Why is the floor so sticky at this 5-star restaurant?
But like,
Can't imagine.
Aside from the horrifying logistics of trying to keep myself focused on an interview at a nightclub,
Right.
This is kind of fucking cool, right?
It
like,
is.
I mean, even if you know what the guy believes, just sliding checks to entrepreneurs at a nightclub is...
And we're talking big money. This is at least $10,000 on each check. These are fat checks.
Yeah, and like, we know that he's hateful and bigoted, but like, if I was a fresh grad and a young entrepreneur in San Francisco, I'd be trying to get into that nightclub too.
Dude, let me tell you, I feel like there are a whole lot of people in San Francisco expecting a whole lot more for $10,000. It's pretty good. If he wrote me a check for 10 grand fresh out of school and I found out about his hideous beliefs later on, I would probably be like, he's quirky.
He's kind of quirky. Yeah.
I'm ashamed of that fact, but it's a reality. Like, fresh out of school, I was very much for sale. Shamefully so.
Yeah, I was just hungry.
Me too, man. That was it. You really realize how expensive food is, right?
Yeah, if he said, yeah, we'll do the interview on the restaurant side of my nightclub, I'd be like, oh, you don't even need to send me the check, just pay for dinner.
Dude, yeah, I love that. And if he said, we'll do the meeting at a nightclub, I'd be like, they have food there?
Yeah, exactly. Like, what's the app situation looking like?
So at this time, Silicon Valley was absolutely fizzing with doodads, and Peter, freshly moneyed and cool, became a big name. He refused to invest in Elon's freshly commandeered car company, Tesla, because fuck that dude. And he refused... Yeah, right? And he refused to invest in a streaming service founded by PayPal alums, which was created to see footage of Janet Jackson's boob, called YouTube.
Whoop!
Yeah, I feel like that one probably burns him a little bit now. But Peter was focused instead on social media startups, investing in names like Friendster, which none of you have ever heard of, and a horrible platform called LinkedIn. I suspect many of you are familiar with LinkedIn. Noticing this pattern, Mike Moritz introduced Peter Thiel to Sean Parker in 2002, a handsome drug-addled young man with a quote-unquote social media app called Plaxo, which was seeing success by acting like what's called a computer virus. You sign up and it asks you to add friends to the network, and then it spams their email until they join, and so on. Peter didn't invest wisely, but he kept in touch with Sean, who 2 years later was fired from Plaxo for allegedly offering employees cocaine on the rare occasion he actually went to work. Cocaine is a regular part of his story.
Yeah, Sean's
allegedly.
Cool as fuck. Allegedly.
Allegedly.
Is Sean hiring allegedly?
He's very generous with the white stuff. You gotta give him credit where credit's due. It takes a lot to be gracious with cocaine, I feel like.
Yeah, I've never known people who had cocaine to be like super jazzed about giving it away.
Shortly after this, though, he brought Peter a more interesting proposition. A kid at Harvard had created a social media app that was spreading to universities across the nation. More importantly, as soon as a new campus was reached, 80% of the students invited to create an account did, and they stuck around. Where so many of his meetings took place at Friesen, this one took place at Peter's office. Sean came in with Mark Zuckerberg, who was wearing jeans and shower shoes. Sean did most of the talking, and Zuck stared at the table, opening his mouth only once to tell Peter about another idea of his, a file-sharing service called Wirehog, which sounds gross. Terrible name choice, Mark. Peter passed, choosing instead to focus on the social media service, which was a more sterile-feeling iteration of MySpace. Remember MySpace?
Yeah, it's interesting that in a world of bespoke solutions and identity and internet personality, you described it really well. The sterile Facebook beat out the much more bespoke MySpace. Like, I know people that were like learning how to HTML code to get their favorite song on their MySpace. Like,
Yeah.
kids were into that shit.
Kids loved it.
Yeah.
I feel like the one thing that fucked MySpace was that they took the extra step of letting people rank their friends.
Interesting.
Yeah, Facebook didn't have that, and I feel like there was an unheard sigh of relief with that. Like, oh, I don't have to do that. Okay, I'm actually kind of into that shit.
Yeah.
The conversation was compelling enough, and Peter agreed to loan $500,000 to Zuck and Sean, adding, however, that if the company could build a 1.5 million person user base by the end of the year, he would agree to that money becoming an investment in the company. Fortunately for Peter, Facebook flew past these goals. The $500,000 that Peter spent here would mark perhaps the greatest investment of his entire career and one of the best investments made in Silicon Valley ever. Peter sent Zuckerberg off with another cool guy warning: don't fuck it up. This very same year, Peter the Optimist would proclaim, it's the worst time ever to be a venture capitalist.
Oh, Pete.
Oh, Peter. Come on. What a quirky guy.
Chapter 2. Peter Thiel becomes the press.
Now, around this time, Peter, likely emboldened by all the glowing press up to this point, decided to take a stab at running a media venture of his own. With $10 million and an almost correct understanding of the fan base, Thiel started a magazine focused on NASCAR called American Thunder.
Sounds like a store brand version of Mountain Dew.
Yeah, when you say it like that too, it sounds like a trim level of the Silverado.
And that's what it feels like to drive a Ford F-150. Complete with American Thunder.
Couldn't have done it better. I love that. I say almost correct understanding of the fan base because Thiel had NASCAR fans pegged as mostly conservative. I don't think anyone's fighting him on that, but unlike Thiel, I think a healthy portion of NASCAR's viewership and American Thunder's prospective readership were probably tuning in or opening his magazine to get away from politics, which is exactly and pretty much exclusively what Thiel wanted to use the publication to discuss. All politics. He hired, I'm going to butch all these names, they're written, just as a heads up to these horrible, horrible people he hired, if you're listening. He hired Eamon Verghey and Lucas Mast, 29-year-old Cato Institute analyst. The Cato Institute, for those who don't recall, is a Koch brothers thing, which reminds me, check out our series on the Koch brothers. Both men, Eamon Verghey and Lucas Mast, also worked for the Stanford Review, and Lucas Mast promised that there would be absolutely nothing politically correct about this at all. And there wasn't. Like, can you guys just talk about NASCAR, though? Like, Jesus Christ. The Weekly Guys column, as it was called, was written by an editor for the Weekly Standard, who devoted their first column to ESPN's being emasculated by political correctness. The Grub page, which would ordinarily be food stuff, included a maybe tongue-in-cheek discussion on why cooking was really women's work, and that was kind of it.
Oof.
Yeah, Great stuff, right? The magazine blew through Thiel's $10 million seed investment in a single year, and Peter killed it in 2005. Thus, the end of Peter's venture into becoming the press.
He was almost Rupert Murdoch.
Almost. And it all started with NASCAR.
Chapter 3, The Press Sours on Peter Thiel.
So we don't go about giving advice all that often because look at us. But here's some. If you want to be successful in any field, keep your hands off the bottle and keep your dick in your pants. To this end, I would theorize that Peter's seeming disinterest in sex enabled him to achieve a great deal of the success that he did. To his friends, Peter was sexless until 2006, not because he was asexual, but because, to none of their knowledge, he was gay, which was a somewhat disruptive thing to be in the early 2000s. Better to just come off like you hate women so much that you don't want anything to do with them. However, it was in 2006 that Peter began disseminating his sexuality to close friends. It became what was then known as an open secret. I think it's still known as that, but you get it. He started going out on dates. He started going to his bar and other bars to do what's called mingling. And before settling into a serious relationship with a Blackstone vice president, who was based in New York, he would invite his younger gay associates back to his house for parties. Credit where credit's due. Peter Thiel is a lot of things against a lot of people, but as far as we can tell, the man was no sex criminal. No reports suggest he was ever aggressive or did anything non-consensual, and plenty of the young gay men he would invite to his house would describe these gatherings as almost familiar.
Well, and it's really sad that that's where our bar is, right? It's like, oh, one of the guys that we're talking about, like, didn't sexually assault someone? Oh my, what a hero.
Yeah, but this episode has no sexual assault. In fact, there's no record of this man doing any of that.
Yeah.
Head over shoulders on a lot of these people.
Right. But don't get too excited because we still fucking hate this guy. Like, we're just getting to know him. In this last chapter, he's tried his hands riling up the NASCAR people. The fucking NASCAR people.
Don't do that.
That's like a dog whistle slur. Like, not the NASCAR people.
You don't rile up the NASCAR people. Nick Denton agreed with us on this point. These people are businessmen, and they seemingly have complete control of the press. They are not our friends. His solution was Gawker. As Peter was coming out to friends and close associates, Nick Denton was scaling Gawker, which in 2006 was attracting 9 million page views each month. Paltry by the standards of a journalistic outfit of today, but by the standards of journalistic outfits in 2006 and podcasts like ours today, this was and is aspirational and intimidating. I would love 9 million views each month. That would be pretty great. I'd be really happy with that.
Yep.
He had a noble vision for the site. Gawker is here to tell the stories that we all of us being the press corps, knew were true, but were too afraid to write. They went after businessmen, politicians, celebrities, obviously, and what set them apart from their peers was that they were hosing fellow journalists, which I can't imagine I would have given a shit about, even if this was my sort of relaxation or toilet reading. In researching this episode, we obviously had to research Gawker to some extent and found that Gawker was more bad than good. No surprise there. What was a surprise was what an irritating conclusion that was. From time to time, particularly in reference to their Silicon Valley operation, Valleywag, their journalistic work could be pretty damn good. But that wasn't keeping the lights on. The stuff keeping the lights on was unsubstantial and, more than anything else, bitchy. It was just bitchy crap. They would hone into someone who needed journalistic attention, an honest voice to break down what was happening behind the scenes. Let's say Cruella de Vil. And then they just slut shame her. Like, why wouldn't you focus on the Dalmatian thing? Or that she undoubtedly has employees that she treats terribly. Why that? You're hurting people who don't need to be hurt. Cruella de Vil doesn't care about being slut shamed. Anyways, speaking of Valleywag, let's talk about Valleywag. The Silicon Valley subsidiary was never as popular as the main firm Gawker, but it was Nick Denton's baby. And at its start, Nick would be its primary contributor. Now, this was a problem for Peter because Nick Denton in particular hated open secrets. And Peter, who up to this point had enjoyed the perks of godliness a great deal, was sensitive and vulnerable, as is so often the case with men in this position. In 2007, around the time Kara Swisher complimented Thiel's positive outlook, Denton began telling the stories that everyone else was too afraid to write. Right away, the scarcely viewed coverage got under Thiel's skin.
Yeah, remember in our first episode when a young Peter Thiel lost that casual chess match out in the hall because he wasn't paying attention and got flustered and lost the whole tournament shortly afterwards? Peter's an adult now, but this pattern of being flustered by less pronounced things not going his way and that flustering causing problems is still there. So we keep that in mind as we talk about this in this next section.
For sure. Denton accused Thiel of being a founder turned investor. Now, in nerd speak, this is quite the insult. We'll discuss this in the next one. Big ouch there. You like us normies don't get it, but apparently that was quite the body slam. He also picked on the Grotto, a Founders Fund founder founded party house, and Peter's seeming weakness for shitheads like Sean Parker. And this was a pronounced thing. Peter really did gravitate to Sean Parker types. Denton was contacted by a founder, of which we're all familiar, Elon Musk, who even after the big payday was bitter about how PayPal's story was being told and asked for Denton's help writing an alternative history of PayPal, which was just, I can't imagine reading anything more insufferable than that. But in a stroke of what I'll call journalism, Denton also unearthed Thiel's homophobic roots and his connection to Keith Raboy and the Stanford incident. Then Denton stepped back to tend to Gawker once again and brought in Owen Thomas to head Valleywag, and it is here that the allusions to Peter's sexuality began. Thiel had a speaking event in Chattanooga a few months later, and Valleywag made fun of the crowd size.
Dude, how is that like the biggest Achilles heel for right-wing billionaires? It
really seems to carry a lot of weight, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's like you're making the world worse. Get fucked, I do what I want, and your crowd sizes are small. How fucking dare you?
You're destroying everything. I know, I'm just a bad guy like that, right, guys? High fives all around. Then one voice in the back like, nobody likes you. It's like, how dare you say that? How dare you say that to me? Voices cracked, full regalia. Then Thomas mentioned the one person who waited around for Thiel's autograph, a woman who was, as far as Thomas was concerned, barking up the wrong tree.
Yeah, Valleywag, Gawker, they fucking suck, dude.
Yeah.
Like, they just suck. There are certain times in history where the narrative of something that happened is a true good versus evil saga, where one side is truly the victim and the other side is truly the oppressor, like, you know, the Holocaust, or when you and I talk about shitty billionaires. But
yeah,
most of the time, it's between two parties that really fucking suck.
Yeah.
And that is the case here. There is no hero in Peter Thiel versus Gawker. It's just two shitty entities clashing and spraying everybody with their shit.
Yeah, by the way that constitutional crises always seem to unfold, and we'll talk about this soon, is in a fight or in a dispute between two indescribably stupid people.
Yes.
Doing indescribably stupid things. And in this case, we're going to see Peter Thiel weaponize an indescribably stupid person against Gawker, which is an indescribably stupid organization. Now, remember, too, by the way, Valleywag, though it's having this huge impact on Peter Thiel, is really just a blog. But when a gay real estate agent wrote elsewhere that they thought Thiel was a hunk, Thomas put it on the blog, popped it right in, and said, sorry, but Thiel's spoken for But you do stand a better chance than that autograph seeker in Chattanooga. And bitchiness to 11 here. These posts were, by any standard, not popular. Like, people weren't really tuning into this shit. We're talking a few thousand views here and there, and that was kind of it. Gawker's main platform, shitting on celebrities and attacking businessmen elsewhere, was quite popular, but this was just nowhereville. Nonetheless, Peter Thiel was obsessed. Fearing something more severe, he began deputizing Clarion employees to help him escape Gawker. They hired private investigators, which wasn't terribly successful. A guy like Nick Denton can't afford to have secrets to dig up, so he doesn't. It's just, the man's an open book. And while they were interviewing security experts, Valleywag dropped the big one.
Peter Thiel is totally gay, people.
Yep. Once again, the article got barely any attention from the public, but it got plenty of attention from Peter Thiel. The post was structured as a critique of how the Valley treated sex and a surprisingly affectionate call to action for Peter Thiel. Basically, techies have hangups, and though VCs aren't homophobic necessarily, the fear of homophobia snaring later investment rounds was often enough to keep them from backing gay founders. Thiel is a gay, rich, respected businessman. He's untouchable. Why doesn't he blaze the trail? Founders Fund, the tech fund he ran that invested in Facebook and LinkedIn, could usher in a new era of gay entrepreneurialism in the Bay. He should own his sexuality. Enough with this prudish refusal by everyone in the Valley to acknowledge such a core tenet of who a person is. The article ended with the send-off, "More power to him." And Nick Denton commented at the bottom of the piece, "The only thing that's strange about Thiel's sexuality, why on earth was he so paranoid about its discovery for so long?"
Well, Nick, because he's gay and it's the mid-2000s.
Look, what the fuck's the matter with you, dude?
Yeah, people died for that shit, dude. Like,
yeah, are you shitting me?
Yeah.
It is the mid-2000s. As Money Mike just said, MTV is still casting homophobes on their Last Man Standing type shows to clash with the gay participants. Because it's good TV and because this is still a debate that's going on. Gay marriage was the trans healthcare of that decade.
That shit was like Fallujah.
It was, dude. I think that's right. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, Fallujah. I don't know anything about
We'll fact check
warfare.
it, but I think that works. No, you're right. And he's working with the UAE. He's got Saudi investors. It does matter. There is an obvious reason why he wouldn't want that happening and an obvious need for open secrets in the mid-2000s. Lady Gaga isn't big yet.
Did Lady Gaga save the world? Anyway, our next episode.
You know? Yeah. Shortly afterwards, Valleywag posted an article outing Peter Thiel as an Ayn Rand fan.
Which that we will not tolerate.
Yeah, now that, though.
I'm just kidding. I read The Fountainhead in high school and pretended like I knew what it meant. But,
can't imagine Peter gave much of a shit about that big reveal, but those around him noticed a change. He announced to his employees that even though he'd moved Clarion out of San Francisco to get away from the other hedge funds and their staff, he was now taking the company to New York, specifically because of all the hedge funds there.
Very 3D chess of you, Peter.
Yes, smart man. Very quirky, Peter. Very.
Optimistic.
Yes, this guy's an optimist, all right. Love his positive outlook. Those in the know were almost certain that this was really in the vein of getting away from Gawker, which would make sense. He also authored the investor letter for the start of 2008, though there wasn't anything terribly distinct here.
The world is heading to end times.
The entire human order could unravel in a relentless escalation of violence, famine, disease, war, and death. Against this future, it is far better to save one's immortal soul and accrue treasures in the city of God than it is to possess a fleeting fortune in the transient and passing city of man.
Oh my God. The agon between globalization and its alternative will be close. At least in the sense that individual choices will prove to be of decisive significance. That was like a black-pilled fortune cookie. What did that even mean?
Are we all gonna die? In this, We are opposed to the reigning faith in efficient markets. Unlike the faith in efficient markets, however, ours is a faith that seemingly still cannot be named.
This is like if one of those stupid internet advisors, like the Motley Fool, like, the world is ending, how you should be investing for it. Is your 401k prepared for the ending of the world and nuclear holocaust?
9/11 just happened. What does this mean for your Roth IRA?
Right? Fuck, dude. It's like reading Revelations right next to the Wall Street Journal and saying, yes, these two things have something to do with one another.
It's so funny you say that because in this investor letter, he literally quotes Genesis.
Right? What the fuck, dude? What the fuck?
Though he had already warned of a deleveraging event a few months prior, this was different for a few key reasons. Number one, though the first warned of trouble ahead, this letter was obviously longer and seemed to suggest that Thiel wouldn't be able to preserve his fund. Number two, the 10,000-word letter took the rare step of providing instructions to Clarion investors. Repent, beg for forgiveness, pray.
Dude, this guy is becoming unhinged.
Like, this says to me that the man writing it has lost it.
Yeah, dude, imagine like investing half of your life savings into Clarion and getting this investor letter. Like,
getting a 10,000-word investor letter.
I'm paying you 250 basis points, and your best advice to me is pray?
Focus on getting into the city of God and worry not about the worldly possessions. You're the worldly possession manager, man. What are you talking about?
I really, really could have done this for far less money. This is just not... The ROI of this is bad. It's just bad.
Yeah, church is free. They ask you for money, but you just say no. Problem solved.
Yeah.
The ones kissing his ring carried right on doing so. Joe Lonsdale had Palantir withdraw $100,000 cash so that each employee would have $1,000 after Law and Order fell to the wayside. But others, obviously, were concerned. Thiel had $8 billion of other people's money. Could he be trusted in this state of mind? Gawker seemingly fanned the flames here by revealing donations Peter made to an extremist presidential candidate who was tied to racist newsletters. Again, not a glowing endorsement on this man's mental well-being. Now, what most of you know is this. Racist or not, Peter Thiel was onto something here. This wasn't a break from his track record by mid-2008, where every other hedge fund was nosediving. Thiel's fund was up 60%. Crazy or not, the man was getting results. In May, Clarion wrote to investors that they were bullish on politics, and 3 months later, Lehman Brothers and Washington Mutual dissolved. Thiel, with his mad ravings, was right again, but there was a problem. Though Thiel's pleas to investors to repent proved valid to some degree and almost proportional, Peter's team hadn't made a single investment to account for his dire warnings. Suddenly, Peter's behavior looked really manic, and the added pressure seemed to just make things worse. Before September came to a close, Gawker published an article poking fun at Clarion's losses, $900 million by the end of September. Keep in mind, Lehman Brothers went away at the beginning of September. This is 30 days. Already, they had exceeded the gains from Peter's investments into Facebook. Up to that point, that is.
I still can't get over what Gawker is, the fucking publication. Like, it's hedge fund has record losses, and like the article right next to it is Lindsay Lohan's boob fell out of her dress at the Grammys last night. What is that?
Tara Reid has a crazy nipple ratings. How are these two on the same page?
I truly don't understand. I truly don't understand.
In the wake of Lehman's collapse, Peter began flailing. He'd hardly invested anything in publicly traded stocks, but he did so now. He spotted what he thought was the bottom and began furiously buying. $800 million in Google, $800 million in Yahoo, which sounds like a move to suicide. But anyways, this was a different time. $800 million in Yahoo, $1 billion in a handful of bank stocks. The bet was that they would all bounce back when Uncle Sam bailed them out, but Thiel was wrong. The stocks continued dropping, and Peter lost all the gains the firm had made in the first half of 2008. When pensions and sovereign wealth funds started pulling their deposits, Peter realized the error of his ways and sold these stocks just before bailouts were announced, meaning he missed the recovery too. At the end of the year, what had been a $6 billion fund was now just $2 billion, and people were still calling to withdraw deposits. He ended the year down just 5%, handily outperforming other hedge funds, but to outsiders, calling an apocalypse and not betting in accordance was malpractice. Peter's career as a hedge fund man had begun its death spiral. Most on the outside looking in probably figured that Thiel himself would need routine wellness checks atop Clarian's death. Thiel's investment into SpaceX had seemingly backfired. Elon chose to announce the investment after a fourth rocket explosion, which helped him maintain credibility, but made Thiel look like an idiot, even more than he already did. Surprisingly, though, to most who knew him intimately, Thiel seemed okay. Liberated almost by the complete and total defeat.
Like scoring 5% on a pop quiz.
Yeah, where it's like, I mean, there's no disputing that. This wasn't even a chance. Like,
yeah,
wow, I'm fucking dead in the water.
Yeah.
It is. It's almost a relief, isn't it? Like,
it's like, I'm just glad it's over.
Yep.
Like, to your point, there is no uncertainty about me bouncing back. The only thing that I can do is accept.
Yep, that's it. Thiel blamed Gawker for his stunning failures, but at this point, they had been so completely devastating that Peter got a fresh start. He started a seasteading nonprofit, gave millions to life-extending startups, which is weird, perfectly on brand for Peter, but nice and weird. At the start of 2009, he and Paltry Friedman, who we'll talk about soon, wrote to the Cato Institute, and his piece was published under his name in the Start From Scratch issue. This is unusual. Peter does not, he published that completely unhinged investor letter. He hardly ever published under his name at the Stanford Review. Here's a direct quote from our source, comprised of a few direct quotes from that article. Quote, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible." End quote. The U.S. has been on a downward trajectory for the last century. End quote. He went on to claim the last great decade was 1920. Quote, "Since then, women's suffrage and welfare collectors have rendered the notion of a capitalist democracy obsolete." End quote.
Is he gay just because he hates women so much?
That's kind of it, right? Like it seems like he's gay because he hates women so much. And he still has to get his rocks off somehow. It really is.
Yeah, like I think it's just a lesser of two evils thing.
I mean, on the bright side, I guess this is what happens when you give an incel billions of dollars. They don't go shooting up schools, which thank God, but
nice.
You know, same token. Can I get another fresh start, please? Thiel went on to say that he felt SpaceX, Facebook, and seasteading would help the U.S. move in the right direction, things he invested in, incidentally. A return to form, no doubt, but before long, Peter's fresh start would be challenged. Not by Gawker, though also by Gawker. Facebook backer wishes women couldn't vote.
I mean, he said that, though.
He basically said that.
That isn't libel.
Gawker did us all a favor there by reading something released by the Cato Institute and telling everyone about it. It's good journalism.
Yeah, yes.
I have to give it to him.
That is doing the world a service.
He wound up issuing a quasi-apology as a result of this Gawker article, and later compared Valleywag to Al-Qaeda.
Who seems like he would agree with on a lot of stuff.
I mean, you know who else hates women? Jesus. You know who else has some really edgy thoughts on women and voting?
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah. Fucking Al-Qaeda.
Right.
Anyway.
The new threat, directed by David Fincher, would have a far greater impact and a far greater audience. The Social Network, released in 2010, portrayed Thiel as a calculated monster and a shepherd for Musk's ultimate decision to stab Eduardo Saverin in the back. The biggest problem with this accusation is that it was true. Like, that's pretty much exactly
Those are the ones
what
that
Peter did.
really fucking get you. The
Yeah,
ones that
right?
are true are the ones that you're like, ah, shit.
I can't even deny this. Like, they didn't even exaggerate it too hard. That is what I did, and what I did. It's in writing that's what I said and what Zuck agreed to do because of me. The move that's coming is in accordance with a saying of Thiel's now adopted throughout the valley. I'd rather be evil than stupid. Peter Thiel doesn't backpedal here, he leans in. I'll counter this with a line on the first page of Mother Night. You guys have probably gotten accustomed to hearing me ramble about Kurt Vonnegut shit. We are what we pretend to be, so be careful what you pretend to be. If you fuck around and play evil for long enough, you're going to turn into an evil maniac. I would submit for Thiel especially, he was kind of born that way, but for plenty of the other people in the valley, I feel like they kind of eased in toe first, nuts and nips, and now they're in the deep end.
Nuts and nips.
To lean in, he started the Thiel Fellowship. The goal was to take the beats from Zuck's portrayed experience and convey that they were the steps one must take to make it in the valley. Zuck dropped out of school, thus Thiel Fellows, most of whom were in their teens, would be expected to drop out of school to make their dream a reality. Now, when you begin reading the fine print on Silicon Valley upstarts, this isn't actually all that common among the big names. In fact, very few end their enrollment at an Ivy League school to scale their creation. Jobs dropped out of calligraphy school because it was costing his parents a fortune. He felt what we all know as guilt. It was costing his parents a lot of money. He knew he wasn't going to use it, so he left. Gates took a temporary leave to start Microsoft. That way, if Microsoft flopped, he could go back to Harvard. Pretty good. Musk, for all we know, never even got into Stanford at all. And Thiel had a fucking law degree. He'd done 8 years at Stanford. Nonetheless, it was a requirement of accepting a grant from the Thiel Fellowship. $100,000 is yours to use as you please, but first you have to drop out of school. Crucially, every other person we just mentioned had support and community on which they leaned to create what they created. This is where the libertarian Thiel drew the line, though. After a fellow dropped out of school, almost no support was provided by the program. In fact, the support promised by the fellowship wasn't all it had cracked up to be either. Drop out of school and come move to the Bay Area, and we'll give you $100,000 over 2 years. And you can't hold a full-time job or a part-time job. Basically, drop out of school and come spend your early 20s starving to death in Palo Alto.
Yeah, that sounds a lot like indentured servitude.
Man, you're really putting a lot of your destiny in the hands of this man who hasn't thought this Thiel Fellowship thing out very much at all.
Yeah, who also thinks the world's going to end in like 10 minutes anyway, so what's the point of it all?
Typical optimist. To be clear, there were networking events on occasion, but all fellows were invited, which is an issue because there were a lot of these guys. And Thiel was one of the few regular attendees, which meant most events consisted of a bunch of people who couldn't drink, tripping over each other for a minute with Peter Thiel. That's not getting anyone that's not getting anyone very far. In the end, the program succeeded in 2 categories. Fellows had no trouble getting meetings with other CEOs as a result of the program, the Thiel Fellowship, meaning plenty probably landed pretty good jobs. This success was undoubtedly incidental, though. The program's mission, remember, was to breed founders, and these people are landing in careers under other founders. The second great success of the Thiel Fellowship was preempting the bad PR from the social network. To aspiring entrepreneurs, both Thiel and Zuckerberg's portrayal in the movie were viewed as being instructional. Thiel had turned the movie's release into a moment to be celebrated, and it only cost him $2 million to do so. Chump change when you have billions. With that, Peter could shift his focus to destroying that which could not be co-opted. Gawker.
Chapter 4. Peter Thiel sours on the meeting.
Now, in 2011, Peter met the only kind of person he ever seems to meet ever. An attractive young man attending an elite institution. Aaron D'Souza. was his name. We're going to call him Aaron because the name D'Souza being used a ton in this episode is going to get confusing when we talk in the next few episodes. Oxford was the school he was attending, and intellectual property law was the career path he sought. Intellectual property law, for those who don't know, is a hard career path in law. It's a big one and it pays well. The two were introduced because it was thought that D'Souza could help Thiel with the Gawker problem. The first meeting ended at 3 a.m. with Thiel agreeing to cut Aaron a check for $10 million in exchange for helping Thiel wage a war against the very bitchy blog. Peter and Aaron started out as any well-to-do saboteurs. They again went to hire private eyes to follow Nick Denton, failing to realize, again, of course, a man like Nick Denton cannot afford to have a secret life. He cannot afford to have secrets at all. The next idea? Bribe the staff at Gawker to sabotage the company, bug the newsroom, or hire spies to infiltrate the company. Ultimately, though, Peter decided that they should probably just stick to the strictly legal stuff. Strictly and technically legal. In the process of this campaign, Palantir reached out to a young sister.
Red Bill, you've mentioned Palantir a couple times. Do you want to explain a little bit about who Palantir is?
Thank God. Money Mike. Yes, that's a great idea. Palantir is going to be the focus of our next episode. It is Thiel's military contractor startup, and it runs in concert to Clarium and to the Founders Fund, kind of to everything else. It's one of his ventures that actually makes it. Gotcha. But yeah, it's a military contractor. He'll lean on it often to tackle tertiary objectives. Do you think that's good?
Yeah.
All right, hell yeah. Let's see. In the process of this campaign, Palantir reached out to a young systems admin at Gawker with a lucrative job offer. The systems engineer then underwent 5 rounds of interviews for the positions, interrupted frequently by questions about the servers at Gawker, Gawker's security providers, the overnight headcount at Gawker, and the version of Linux they were running over at Gawker, and on and on and on. What the fuck were they planning to do to Gawker? How many people are patrolling the offices at night is an insane question to ask.
And did that young systems admin get the job?
Right.
Because if I went to 5 interviews for a weird, shitty job and I didn't get it, I'd be pissed.
Oh, yeah. And the 5th interview was his last with the prospective employer, likely because Palantir had everything Thiel would need if they wanted to do whatever the hell they wanted to do, a hack or a Watergate type operation. All is on the table. But the fact that this young interviewee didn't catch on tells me he might not have been an excellent prospect for a systems administrator anyways.
Yeah. He probably got to the 5th interview. He was like, man, I'm killing it.
Yeah.
And the whole time they're like, this guy's dumb.
This guy, we can't, even if they were genuinely considering hiring him, they're like, we can't hire this guy, right?
Give somebody else the keys to the castle. We can't do that.
He's an open book. And we're a military contractor. This will never work out.
Yeah.
Even if their hearts were in the right place, this is a recipe for disaster. The interviewee eventually told his superiors at Gawker of the incident.
What an idiot. I mean, no one asked him. Dude folded it with no pressure. Probably got fired, too.
On every front, right? Like, man, did this kid blow it. A Bay Area law firm brought in a few of the senior staff as well, and it was determined that this, too, was likely part of Thiel's campaign. An important ethical barrier for Thiel was that he didn't want to fund libel or defamation suits against the company, even though these are most common. Peter claimed this was because he didn't want to undermine freedom of the press if he won, but I don't think he gave a shit. I don't think he gives a shit about a lot of the stuff he pretends to give a shit about. Look at what he's doing. The goal is clearly to set a don't fuck with Peter Thiel precedent that can't pay any respect to any sort of journalistic institution. And tellingly, other times, he would just renege on this completely, showing little regard for precedent, just picking the cases that were most winnable. That's what he was worried about. He worked through D'Souza, who hired Charles Harder, who was an entertainment lawyer, to work on Thiel's behalf to run opposition research. Harder found the most salacious pieces by Gawker and several quotes from Denton that he felt would harm his image should a case go to court. And the firm would eventually discover that Gawker had used unpaid interns and helped those interns sue the company. He arranged several cases like this, was a big part of Harder's job for Thiel. Harder represented one man who claimed to have invented email, who was mocked by the site. He represented an independent journalist who Gawker accused of having a nervous breakdown. And lastly, Terry Bollea, or Hulk Hogan, as we all know him. And this is the big one, by the way. October 4th, 2012, Hogan, now a GOP sweetheart, as of a few weeks prior, found himself looking at his own bronzed ass on his monitor. Gawker posted a 1.5-minute clip of Hogan banging a friend's wife. Gawker refused to take down the video despite Hogan's requests it be removed, and Harder then caught wind of the complaints. He sued Clem on Hogan's behalf later that month, soon naming Nick Denton and Delario, the journalist who released Hogan's bronzed ass in a video, onto the Gawker page as well. The suit noted Hogan's heavyweight championship title and asked for $100 million in damages. Gawker's staff assumed this was no big deal, but they were wrong. Hogan assumed that taking this to court would help bury an unreleased portion of that video where he used the N-word repeatedly. He was also wrong.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Hold on. I know that Hulk Hogan has had an affinity for the N-word in the past, but are you telling me that in the video of him banging his friend's wife, he uses the N-word?
A lot.
How?
Apropos of nothing. I'm not a terribly racist guy, but I'm a little racist. Fucking N-word. He said that a few times. Talked some shit about some guy his daughter was dating. Really,
the amount of racist you have to be to throw a hard R during like sexy time
with your dick out, like
like slurs and dicks coming out at the same time. Wild, just wild.
What
behavior.
Are you? What kind of creature are you?
Yeah. So like, let's be clear. Again, we're not living in a fucking timeline where Hulk Hogan is a victim. I mean, yes, what Gawker did was wrong, but Hulk Hogan's also a piece of shit. Again, two shitty things interacting.
This is two stupid parties fighting against each other for stupid reasons.
Yeah, this is unstoppable stupid meets immovable stupid. It's just stupid.
I love that. Denton, assuming the lawsuit was focused on the Clems, that is Heather, the woman who banged the Bollea, and Bubba the Love Sponge, the man who watched, asked his lawyers to coordinate with Bollea's to find an agreeable settlement amount. Well, he haggled with insurance because his policy didn't cover invasion of privacy. Things were going predictably, and Denton assumed this would go the way they all did. Dish out a few million, haggle with insurance, which is always a nightmare, whoever you are and whatever you're doing. But he too was wrong. Settlement talks collapsed inextricably in the 11th hour, and the case was back on. Hogan's lawyers refused to explain themselves. Further, in December 2014, the Hulkster dropped the emotional distress claim, meaning Gawker's insurance was off the hook entirely. Suddenly, it was beginning to seem a lot like what the nearly bankrupt Terry, I'm real good with math, with numbers like my dad was, I'm pretty much dialed in, Bollea wanted Gawker's death certificate more than he wanted a nice payday. Keep in mind, Gawker going bankrupt means he gets a fraction of whatever the court awards him. Adding on to this suspicion was that Harder's firm, which had almost no cases, also seemed on board with this approach. This is unusual for a firm, especially a small one, helping a client sue a media company or sue someone else on libel, something like that. They want a settlement.
Right.
They want this thing done outside of court because they have to keep the fucking lights on.
Right.
So this is weird. In early 2015, Gawker writers began looking into the case. Was Terry paying these bills on his own? They lined up a list of suspects, a long one. This is Gawker we're talking about. Chuck Johnson, the alt-right guy who named the victim in an ongoing rape trial? No. The supposed inventor of email? No. Peter Thiel. Oh, God. Yeah, it's Peter Thiel.
Of course it's Peter Thiel.
Gawker might have saved itself if it could prove Balea was getting secret funding from Peter Thiel, but they couldn't. They did get close. In January, they hired David Golden, a crisis PR operative who got word that Balea's lawsuit was getting funded by a billionaire whose gay son had supposedly been outed by the site. This was a critical misunderstanding. John Cook, the site's executive editor, and J.K. Trotter, now thrown off Thiel's scent, rifled through their archives, and they found a lot of prospects, but not a single sure thing. Again, this is Gawker we're talking about. Peter Brandt was their most likely suspect. They'd outed his son, and he'd written an angry letter to him. The runner-up was, once again, Peter Thiel. Not the gay son of a billionaire, but a gay billionaire who just hated him so much and was not above this sort of thing.
A gay petty billionaire.
Yes, very petty. In March, the trial started, and this was all the evidence they had. Conspiratorial rumors. In court, Gawker got fucking owned. Harder's approach was separating the man from the myth. The man on the radio talking about his sex life, bragging about his big wiener on the radio, was the indestructible Hulk Hogan. The Hulkster is never caught fucking on camera because it would be too incriminating. No one survives intimate contact like that with Hulk Hogan. Terry Balea was different. Terry Balea's penis is not 10 inches, is a direct quote from the Hulkster. And he would know. Theoretically, he had front row seats to Terry's very ordinary penis. Who better to ask, right? Terry's a real grower, brother. Gawker had inadvertently captured a sex act being performed by the lowly Terry Balea, the man behind the Hulk. The Tampa jury delivered a death blow to Gawker after just 6 hours of deliberation. Gawker owed Balea $115 million. For good measure, $25 million was heaped onto that pile as punitive damages. When he learned of the verdict, Thiel was overcome with joy. "It's the most philanthropic thing I've ever done," he exclaimed.
The best thing that Peter Thiel ever did for the world was save Hulk Hogan. Oh, no. Honestly, dude, we can end the podcast here. That says it all.
Yeah, there it is, right? And by the way, through evidence admission, the other stretch of footage of Terry Balea using racial slurs made it out into the media. Like, the only person who won here was Peter Thiel. Yep. Gawker filed for bankruptcy in June, though the site was still publishing. Denton said he would appeal the verdict, so Thiel pressed Harder to go on the attack. No longer concerned about discretion, Harder began piling flimsy defamation suits onto Gawker's burning body, ensuring a sustained burn. Denton would later speculate in an interview with Andrew Ross Sorkin that a Silicon Valley billionaire had funded the suit, but the speculation was unneeded. In no time, Thiel Associates revealed his role. In response, Denton worked with an intermediary to arrange a meeting with Thiel, with the hopes that he could get Thiel to drop the suits against Gawker writers, avoid financial ruin, and perhaps even keep Gawker alive. In his mind, this was a win-win. Thiel would see the opportunity to make his point, avert a risky defeat in appeals court, look merciful, and avert the destruction of a media company and consider it a no-brainer. But Denton was wrong again. During the meeting, Thiel pressed his advantage. He wanted Gawker gone and Denton financially crippled. As such, he would continue his attacks until Denton filed for personal bankruptcy a few months later in August. At the end of that month, Denton published Gawker's final post. Thiel has gotten away with what otherwise would be viewed as an act of petty revenge by reframing the debate on his terms. He identified Thiel as a member of the new tech elite, members of which were extremely sensitive to criticism, but with the confidence that they can transform or disrupt anything, including the press. By the way, those were both direct quotes from the Contrarian. Denton exited bankruptcy after Gawker dropped its appeals and agreed to pay Balea $30 million, plus an additional sum from Denton personally. In a blog post describing the settlement in November, Denton explained that he had given up his appeals because Thiel had made it clear that he would never relent. It would be impossible to continue fighting the case. And that was that. Constitutional crises, as mentioned, always arise from stupid on stupid. The impetus for Gawker's downfall was that Hulk Hogan thought it was cool to be racist and didn't know that he was being filmed, and a few bitchy gay guys wanted to laugh at his gross butt. In the end, the results are just as grave. Peter Thiel, upset with its coverage, took it upon himself to ruin a major media company and its owner, and he was successful. That's the end of the episode, gang. Thank you so much for listening. In the next episode, we'll jump into that Palantir thing. We'll extrapolate more on that. And thank you so much for listening. Like, comment, subscribe. We love you all. And goodbye.